Last month, the world's oldest leader, Cameroon's 92-year-old president Paul Biya, announced that he was running for re-election this year. If he wins and survives, he would be president until he was nearly 100. This is obviously an extreme example of gerontocracy, or rule by old people, but it's seemingly a growing phenomenon. A decade ago, back in 2015, none of the leaders of the world's 10 most populous countries were above the age of 70. Today, 9 of them are. This means that well over half of the world's population is governed by septuagenarian or octogenarian leaders. So in this video, we're going to explore and explain this apparent global gerontocracy, looking at Africa, the continent with the most pronounced gerontocracy, the United States, which has a particularly infamous one, and Europe, which has seemingly avoided it. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. Africa is actually an exceptionally young continent, the most youthful in the world, with the median age at around 19 years old. The median age of African leaders, however, is about 66, meaning that it has the most pronounced age gap in the world. We mentioned Cameroon's Paul Biya at the start, in power for more than 40 years and seeking another 7-year term, already aged 92. Incredibly, he's hardly an exception. Uganda's 80-year-old president Yoweri Museveni, in office since 1986, is running for re-election next year, and Côte d'Ivoire's 83-year-old president Alassane Ouattara is seeking a 4th term this year. Long-ruling octogenarians also lead the Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and Zimbabwe. Even in more democratic African countries, it's not uncommon to see relatively old leaders elected too. Liberia's President Joseph Boakai is 80, Nigeria's Bola Tinubu is 73, and South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa is 72. So, is this a problem? Well, for non-democratic leaders, the problem is less their age and more the corruption, authoritarianism, and repression that enables them to continue to rule well into their twilight years. But advanced age does sometimes throw up governance problems too. Cameroon's Paul Biya, for example, is known for semi-regularly disappearing from public view for extended periods, usually staying in Switzerland, with some speculating that his absences involve time in hospital. But zooming out a bit, there are signs to suggest that there is a widespread frustration at the continent's aged leadership. According to Afrobarometer polling across 34 African countries, an average of 76% of respondents are in favour of a maximum age limit for heads of government. In the last few years, we've also seen youth-led protests across Africa, from Kenya to Uganda, Nigeria, and beyond. While the proximate cause for each movement does vary, a common thread is Africa's growing young, tech-savvy, and urban population becoming frustrated at the poor job opportunities, economic insecurity, and bad governance that they face. A feeling of political disenfranchisement as a result of the age gap between what is perceived as an immovable and out-of-touch ruling class and the general population surely only fuels this frustration. In some cases, this tension has brought about generational change through both democratic and undemocratic means. In Senegal, protests preceded an election last year that saw 44-year-old Bassirou Faye elected the country's youngest president. And in Guinea in 2021, 36-year-old military officer Mamadi Doumbouya overthrew the elected government of Alpha Condé, who had controversially been re-elected to a 3rd term after amending the constitution. Gerontocracy is evidently particularly acute in Africa, but it's the United States that probably fairly gets the most attention when it comes to the discussion of gerontocracy. President Donald Trump is 79 years old, really not that much younger than Joe Biden, who bowed out amid age concerns. Remarkably, Donald Trump, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton were all born within months of each other in 1946, despite their presidencies spanning more than 3 decades. It's not just presidents either. Despite slightly ticking down after recent elections, the median age of members of the US Congress has risen significantly since the 1980s, and both the House and Senate are among the oldest legislative chambers in the world. It's not even just that the youth are underrepresented either. According to the Pew Research Center, millennials born from 1981 to 1996 overtook baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, to become the most populous generation in the US in 2020. But this is far from being reflected in Congress, which is dominated by boomers and Gen X. So why is this the case in the US? Firstly, and this does apply to the whole world, advances in medicine and public health means that people are just living longer, so aging politicians are able to keep working longer than ever. In the US, it costs a huge amount of money to run a political campaign, meaning that wealthier, better connected, and therefore older Americans are at an advantage. Additionally, minimum age requirements, 35 to be president, 30 to be a senator, 25 to be a representative, and 21 to 25 in many state legislatures, effectively delay the start of political careers. Incumbents also have a distinct advantage. In fact, the incumbent re-election rate for US House members has not dipped below 85% for at least 60 years. This, coupled with the apparent aversion of many older politicians to the idea of retirement, naturally pushes up the age of the political class. There is obviously something of a vicious cycle here too, in that youth underrepresentation in politics drives lower youth turnout and political engagement, which drives further underrepresentation, and so on. As we established in the introduction though, gerontocracy is by no means exclusive to Africa or the United States, as many of the world's most populous or influential countries are led by septuagenarians and octogenarians. For example, we've got Recep Erdogan, who's 71, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, both 72, Narendra Modi at 74, Benjamin Netanyahu, 75, Donald Trump and Lula da Silva are both 79, and Ali Khamenei is 86. According to The Economist, going into 2025, the world's leaders were, on average, older than ever, a trend that they say is largely being driven by autocracies. This makes sense. Autocrats aren't keen on giving up on power, and every year they age, they push up the average. But is a world with older leaders cause for concern? Age can bring greater experience, wisdom, and a sense of perspective to higher office. But at the same time, it can leave leaders disconnected from their constituents and drive political disenfranchisement. Mental acuity and health concerns aside, some even argue that the world's aging ruling class is a destabilizing force, as these so-called old men in a hurry rush to secure a legacy, like, say, territorial expansion. So, where do we need to look to find an exception to this seemingly worldwide gerontocracy? Strangely, the answer is the world's oldest continent, Europe. Despite Europe's high median age of just under 45, today's European leaders buck the global trend and are on average a relatively youthful 55. So why does Europe boast such a relatively young leadership? Well, there are a number of possible reasons. European countries generally have the lowest minimum ages to stand as a candidate for their lower houses of parliament, and often have proportional representation or mixed electoral system. Academic research suggests that both low age requirements and proportional or mixed systems increase the political representation of young people in parliaments, which can naturally feed into younger leaders. Everything we've discussed in today's video plays into a broader sense of uncertainty in the world at the moment. And who's so often at the middle of all of that? Well, the United States. So in the next issue of our magazine, Too Long, we're discussing this geopolitical shift and whether we're currently observing the end of the American order. In that section, we discuss everything from the collapse of democratic norms in the US, to the decline of American soft power, to issues with the US economy, or the battle for universities, before discussing who could potentially take over in a post-American world. So if you want to find out what we really think, now's your chance. It's not just the US though. This issue is our longest ever at 78 pages, full of our very best journalism and analysis. So we also get into why Germany's military might is growing, if Farage could become the UK's next Prime Minister, why countries are outsourcing their migrants, why the global order is collapsing with Professor James Kerr-Lindsay, and why leaders like Putin and Netanyahu seem to be getting away with it. The magazine has now officially been published, so if you order a copy today, we'll ship it as soon as we can. Or if you select the digital edition, we'll send a digital version of Too Long straight to your inbox. Plus, if you want the very best deal, you should make sure you subscribe to Too Long. That way, not only do you get every issue going forward, but you'll also get 20% off every copy as long as you're a member. On top of that, this week only, if you use code LASTCHANCE20, you'll get an additional 20% off this copy, bringing down the cost from £9.99 to £6.40 for the digital edition, or £13.99 to £8.96 for the physical edition. This really is your last chance too. From next month, all new subscribers won't receive this issue of Too Long, instead having to wait until December's The New Middle East issue. So if you want the reduced subscriber pricing on this issue, this really is your last chance. As we outlined in our recent video on TLDR's finances, TLDR actually made a loss last year, and Too Long is a big part of our plan to make TLDR profitable in 2025, in order to continue funding the free videos that we make every day. So if you want to be part of that, then head to toolong.news and subscribe today.